Hi everyone, welcome to Module 6. I'm looking at the clarification questions straight off the bat. A bit of a quiet week this, but you should use this, I think, to prepare for the next Monday, I think, or next Sunday, I should say, when your next, the next installment, the next check-in will be for your overall project. So I'm looking forward to see how you've advanced on that. All right, so 3 questions will do. Very close. Jonathan Saxon at the top with 11, Garrett Rand with 10, Daniel Green with 8 in number 3. So it's nice to see different names each time, actually. So good questions, all 3 of you. So here's the first one from Jonathan Saxon. It says this: my question is, Wallerstein uses economic understanding and terms to illustrate his view of world politics and to predict the future of world power. Is it common for these economic-minded theorists like Wallerstein and Marx to lend their knowledge towards political theory? Does economics and politics overlap as such, or is it more of a niche type of theorizing? Wallerstein uses many terms like Kondratiev, phases A and B to illustrate why things occurred in capitalist societies and to give the historical context of his theories. I found it an interesting approach. Brilliant. Glad you liked that. This is quite different from what we've been looking at, and I'm glad that you did notice that. This is Wallerstein in particular is a Marxist approach. It's a sort of a neo-Marxist, new Marxist approach, and so the fact that you've linked him there with Marx is spot on. And Marxism is characterized by a use of economic theory to explain political events. Remember, for Marx, or maybe you don't remember, maybe you haven't studied this, right? But for Marx, it's the relations of production, right? The relationships that people have in the systems of production, right? In our case today, right, the capitalist system, and certainly that was the system that Marx was trying to explain and to that was really coming into being as he was doing his writing. So, capitalist system. That's the capitalist system requires us to arrange ourselves, to organize ourselves in certain ways, in comparison to one another, or in relationship to one another, right? It also the capitalist system also for Marx brings certain commodities, right, and certain factors of production into play, and we have some sort of relationship with each other and with these factors of production, and it's those relationships and the changes in those relationships that really determines outcomes for Marx, right? And so Wallerstein's taking that, and he is obviously modernizing it. He's adding to it a little bit. He has these things that are important. He has and this is an important distinction from liberalism and realism that we've been reading up to now, is that Marxism, as sort of developed by Wallerstein, there's really a focus on economic factors of production as the real agents, right? As the real, at least you might not really call them agents, right? But you might call them the structure, right? The capitalist structure, the structure of the relationships of production. That's what determines outcomes. And so Wallerstein, for the international system, Wallerstein, it's no longer, we're no longer talking about states in relation to each other. What we're talking about now instead through Wallerstein is these products, leading products. Right? There are certain products that are leading products that capitalists, corporations, businesses can charge as much as they like, right? And so they have a massive profit margin. Sort of makes me think of mobile phones, right? Oil. When I've done this class before, when I've done this reading, or when I've talked about Wallerstein in other classes as well, I remember one time for one class, I think it was like 301 or something, but I looked up, okay, well, which sort of a down and dirty method of trying to figure out what are the leading products today. If you look at the companies making the most profits today, it's oil companies, right? So that might be the leading product of the current time, or one of the leading products. There's not only one, because they're making the most profit. So So yeah, we have these leading products, and it's those leading products that are really at the center of international relations. They're the ones that really drive the action. It's not states seeking security that are driving the action. And remember, both liberalism and realism really have states at their center. Right? For realists, states can never be sure of their security, so they've always got to be increasing their defenses and their power. Their interests are defined in terms of power. Liberalism maybe takes a more optimistic view of things and saying, well, look, we don't always have to resort to war, but still they have states as the center. Relations between states, for the liberals, they just add these institutions, right, which is states working collectively together to produce outcomes. For Wallerstein, for Marxists generally, it's not states that are in control. It's capitalist corporations, it's production, it's the means of production, it's the relations of production. That sort of system is what we can figure. We can use that to figure out what's going to happen. So it is quite distinct. Liberalism and realism share, and we saw with the Cohen reading, right, that actually Cohen was deliberately sort of reaching out to realists. He was quoting E.H. Carr in his piece. Marxists are over here, right? They're doing something significantly different from realism and from liberalism. So that's well noticed, well put in the question. Yes, it's fairly common. There are Marxists in international relations. It's probably not as mainstream, right, as realism and liberalism, right, which is where we start. But it's absolutely there, and we read some of that this week, so that's good. I found it interesting to lend their knowledge towards political theory. I think it is political theory. I think it's international relations theory as much as the realists and the liberals are doing it, as much as the constructivists that we'll read next time, or the feminists. It's absolutely political theory because, and I meant to link this in earlier, right? But because what we're looking at is relations of production, relations between people, right? And once you get into relations between people and of course how they're governed, now we're into politics. Now we're into political theory. So it absolutely fits. But you're right, it's not as mainstream, and it's a little bit, we can think of it as slightly separate. As we would be able to, I think, with all of the other two theories that we'll discuss now after this, constructivism, a certain kind of constructivism has been incorporated a little bit into the mainstream, so more successfully than Marxism or feminism, certainly. But yeah, we are going a little bit now outside of the mainstream, which is a nice opportunity. So does economics and politics overlap as such? Yeah, I think it does on a fundamental level. Certainly in Marxism, it absolutely is one and the same. Or is it a more of a niche type of theorizing, right, which I think I've covered a little bit already. Wallerstein uses many terms like Kondraty, phases A and B, to illustrate why things are cared in capitalist societies, and we'll talk more about those, I think, in one or two of the questions that we're going to do. And to give the historical context to his theories. Yes, I found this an interesting approach. Great. Thank you again for that one. For that one, Jonathan. Excuse me. All right, so the next one's a slightly shorter question, but it's by Garrett Rand, very good, 10 upvotes. If hegemonic power is maintained by demonstrating military capabilities, which in the form of war cost money and lives and have a negative effect on citizens, and power is partially the result, I think, of economic stability. How can a nation justify to itself going to war? Wouldn't war be destabilizing, making its hold on its power waver and jeopardizing its dominance? And I think Wallerstein is really wanting to make that point. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next question as well. But I think he wants to make that point that, and I don't think this is a particularly distinctive of Marxist international relations as opposed to realism or liberalism. I think realists, you can absolutely be a realist and say that we're in a state of war of all against all. To say that power is the defining characteristic, is the defining goal and interest of all states, you can say all those things and still probably agree with this, right? That really war, having to actually fight a war is destructive, right? Is self-defeating. Ideally, even if you're a realist, right? A realist might think that it's very hard to avoid war ultimately. But they would still say that it's, you know, it's not the ideal outcome, right? Because it diminishes your power, right? Because you've got to use your resources to, lots of your resources are going to get destroyed, right? So you'll have fewer resources at the end are going to get used up in war. So you can absolutely agree with this. I think if you're a realist, but you will say as a realist, your conclusion will be, we have to prepare for war, right? And the way to avoid war is to prepare for war. Right? The way to be avoid war is to be strong and make sure nobody else dares touch you. And that's something that we've heard, I think, President Trump talk about. That you know, yes, we're strong, but I'm going to make sure that we're even stronger, right? That nobody dares to fight against us. That's a realist approach. The idea being that you can only really rely on your own military capabilities to save you, right? So we're going to increase them. We're going to make them more powerful. It's very realist. Liberals will say, no, you know, we can enter into agreements. We can have some sort of a structure of international laws and norms that we all respect. And we can go around making sure everybody else respects those and bolstering those. And that's another way. We don't have to just rely on ourselves. We can actually enter into dialogue with other states and bring peace that way. That's your liberal approach. Marxists, where we are now with Wallerstein, you know, their approach is, look, the capitalist system, this system of when Wallerstein talks about leading products, this oversupply, this leads, and I think in other versions of this class we've read Lenin's Imperialism, who makes this point much less subtly, I should say. But look, the system that we have, the current capitalist system, it pushes us towards this, right? It makes war inevitable, right? It makes, you know, in Wallerstein in particular, I was going to go to Lenin, but we haven't read Lenin, so let's do Wallerstein. Right? Wallerstein in particular, where do those producers of the producers of the leading products, where do they set up? They set up in strong states, in states that are able to guarantee their monopolies or safeguard their monopoly for a time. Remember, for Wallerstein, the monopolies are going to, they're self-disintegrating, right? Self-undermining. I think he uses a different word, but that's the gist of it, right? They're only going to last for a certain amount of time anyway. But if you ally yourself, if you're the producer of a leading product, if you associate yourself and ally yourself with a state, a strong, powerful state, they'll be able to guarantee your profits for a longer time, right? And so, of course, what happens when rivalries occur between states in which contain producers of leading products, maybe the same leading products, well, they start to have sanctions against each other. They start to put trade embargoes on one another. And if you're a powerful state, you're able to get away with doing that. If you're a weak state, you can't, which is why powerful states have leading products and weak states don't, because weak states can't protect them. They offer no real benefit to the producers, right? So, but anyway, the point is that the system, this leading product system that he talks about there, leads to war, right? The third question actually gets in a little bit more, asks us to go a little bit more detail into this connection between hegemonic power, global hegemonic power, and I suppose economics. I think maybe it was a different one, but anyway, I think this is a beginning. How can a nation justify to itself going to war? It's got to be a last. I think for all theorists, it's got to be a last resort. Right? Nobody wants an actual war. Realists are preparing for war. Realists think that, you know, like the clouds, it's going to rain any minute now, even if it's not raining right now. So we're going to prepare for it. We're going to have our umbrella, our big umbrella that the rain wouldn't dare fall upon. Right? Liberals think, yep, the war's a reality. It's a distinct possibility. We live in like the realists, we live in an anarchic system. War could break out any moment, but if we bind ourselves with rules and laws and agreements between ourselves, then we'll prevent war that way. And then, of course, for Marxists, it's inherent in the capitalist system, in the structure of the capitalist system, in the way that capitalists operate, right, where they're always trying to make more money, right? Lenin says in his Imperialism, which we didn't read, but you know, as the markets get saturated, right? We've sold all the iPhones we can in the United States and in Britain, right? Now we need bigger markets, other markets to sell our things to, right? And so that leads to, for Lenin, imperialism, and obviously he's writing 100 years ago, 200 years ago, I should say. But wait, I've gone too far back now. 100 years ago, where maybe a little bit more than that, though, where you have expansion of the British Empire and all empires, right? The Americans are doing it, but the French certainly, and the British and the Spanish are losing it rapidly, but the Portuguese and the Dutch, the Germans come a bit late to the scene, which is what ends up starting World War I. The Italians as well. All right, later on, I suppose. Still. So that's Lenin, that's Marxism, that's the same ilk, the same sorts of theorizing of, and so to prevent war, we have to change the system, right? And Wallerstein at the end asks us, he says, look, the capitalist system's run its course, now it's failed. The country that was sort of upholding the capitalist system has failed, he says as well. And so what's going to replace it, right? And maybe we should look for a more peaceful system, one that doesn't lead to wars. And that takes us on to the final question from Daniel Green. Is Wallerstein trying to offer a look into the cycle of global hegemonic powers? I think that's a secondary consideration for him, but an important one. Secondary to the economic argument, right? Or is Wallerstein trying to tie capitalism into the downturn of hegemonic powers? I don't know if he quite does that, at least in the reading that we read. I don't know if he quite manages it. He definitely wants to associate. He wants to associate those two things at one particular point in history, right, at the end of the 60s. Right? It seems to be saying, to me, the way I read it, and if you can read it in a different way, point it out, it would be good. But the way I read it, what he's saying is, there was some sort of strange coincidental sort of downturn in the Kondratiev cycle, at the same time that there was the downturn began in American power, right, in 1968. And also the third thing that he says is there's also at that same time a downturn in the old left. Right, the power of the old left, the credibility of the old left, the communists and social democrats in Europe that who gained power but didn't solve the problems that they said they were going to solve. Right, so you know, neo-Marxists usually don't have any trouble in criticizing old Marxists, right? And so Wallerstein certainly does that. So we've got these three downturns happening at the same time. It's a good job this is online, isn't it? At the same time. But I don't know if he really links them together theoretically. Maybe he does a better job for you than I give him credit for. But he doesn't link them together, but that they all do have this. 1968 seems to be a special year where they all start this downturn. Okay, so that's that part. The Gulf War remains an international. Okay, wait, I've missed a bit. Wallerstein points to the Tet Offensive of 1968 as being the start of the downturn of America. American hegemonic power, right? Hegemonic power is down, the old left is down, and the economic, the ability to create large profits, to accumulate large amounts of capital very quickly is also turned down. That's the Kondratiev cycle. So the Tet Offensive, but what about the Gulf War in the 1990s that took the world off guard with the speed and proficiency of American war fighting? The Gulf War remains an international case study of how to win a war quickly, absolutely. Wallerstein needs to reevaluate what point is trying to be made with the Tet Offensive. Wallerstein then goes on to mention three other factors that supposedly lead to a global revolution. Something is mentioned about the Soviet Union and the old left, yes. So he thinks that that's failed as well in 1968. By 1968, people stopped believing in that. Does Wallerstein believe that socialism is a better route than capitalism? Is that his point? I So he's a Marxist, first of all. I think it's fair to say. This is answering this last one. He claims not to know, right? In the reading that we did, he claims not to know what the better system will be. But you have to think that he has some sort of preference for a kind of socialism, right? For socialism, maybe as a starting point. But, you know, remember, right? You said there's something's mentioned about the Soviet Union and the old left. Yes, and it's mentioned as a failure, right? So if it is socialism that he's advocating, it's not the same socialism as the past, and so then at what, you know, to what degree is it socialism? This isn't really a class on like sort of the political ideology of socialism, which I actually do in another class on political ideologies, and there we discuss some sort of different strands, I guess, of socialism, but but I don't know if he does believe that or not, or if he does, like it's not the old socialism, it's something else. And he claims, as I said, he claims that it's that he doesn't know the system, right? He's asking the question at the end, what system will be better? So so I don't think we can quite say that he's doing that, or that he quite believes that. But it's a fair question because he's a Marxist. The Gulf War remains an international case study. Let's deal with this a little bit about how to win a war quickly. So remember, for Wallerstein, one of the signs of a downturn in hegemony is the need to fight wars at all. Right? But I admit that he's getting things that he has some clarification to do right here. If the Tet Offensive signifies the downturn because it's a failure in war, then what you're doing, Daniel, right? You're saying, well, here's a very quick success. 22 years later. So the way I read Wallerstein, what I think he's getting at here is that the actual need to fight wars at all signifies the end of your hegemony. Hegemony only really works if you don't have to fight wars all over the world to maintain it. Once you start having to maintain your hegemony by fighting wars everywhere, whether you're winning those wars or not winning those wars are costly. Right? So I don't know how much the Gulf War cost. Certainly the speed and proficiency, it was it had a limited scope, a well-defined scope. Right? It was just the liberation of Kuwait. We didn't go on into Iraq. It was an easy one, but then maybe people would have thought that Vietnam would have been easier at the time, right? And so, and obviously, like if we start to compare the two, the terrain is very different, the tactics are very different. It's a very different kettle of fish. But on that point of does the US have to be losing wars for that to be the start of the downturn? It seems by choosing the Tet Offensive that that's somehow in his mind, this sort of unsuccessful wars or battles or parts of wars, campaigns. But equally, the fact that they have to fight a Gulf War, right? The fact that they can't just say, look, Saddam, that's not what we wanted, get yourself out of there right now. And to have him comply, right? That's hegemony, right? It's hegemony when Iraq don't invade Kuwait to begin with, right? And there was I understand that there's some sort of discussion about whether or not there was a mistake made by an American diplomat who sort of gave the green light, unwittingly gave the green light to Hussein. Saddam Hussein thought that he had the green light, and so he did it. So there was that sort of a thing, but the fact that then after the United States says, okay, get yourself out of there now, the fact that they then had to go in and commit US ground troops to the Middle East to repulse him, that's already a cost that hegemons can't afford to pay. If we're going to be a global hegemon, you can't fight the whole world. And even if you can, and even if you have success, like you're saying there, it's costly. Right? In personnel, but in treasure, right? In money terms, it's expensive. Right? It's not expensive to move those troops around, right? To move and to have all of the troops ready that are going to be able to go off and win these wars as effectively and as quickly as we did in the Gulf War. It's not. It's costly. And Wallerstein thinks that. He thinks that as in the same way that leading products sort of erode their own profitability, he also thinks that hegemons, global hegemonic powers, military powers, also undermine their own power, because the more you use it, the more expensive it gets, the less sustainable it is. And so even in obviously a speedy, proficient campaign is way better than a slow, non-proficient campaign. But ultimately, the fact that we're fighting at all for Wallerstein is where we begin to undermine our hegemony. There you go, hegemony. So I think that's what he's getting at. I think that's what he would say. Although I think you're onto something quite interesting with that comparison. All right, I'm going to end it there. Quick video this week, I think, or this module. Find where I put it.